microtransactions didn't just appear. They were engineered, piece by piece through decades of game design, business models, and investor calls. Buckle up, we're traveling back to where it all began. Prepare for a journey through time as we chart the events that butterflied into the modern microtransaction landscape. And it isn't all Todd Howard's fault. So fire up your flux capacitor and join me as we unravel the 10 moments that forged the microtransaction era as we know it. As always, all my sources are going to be cited in the description, but a huge shout out to World of Long Plays and Old Classic Retro Gaming for the use of their footage of the first two games we're going to cover today. Without further ado, let's boot it up. To do this tale justice, we must first venture back to 1982. When Thriller topped the charts, E.T. stole the box office, and arcades pulsed with the glow of Joust, Q*bert, and a lesser-known title called Lost Tomb. Lost Tomb was released in 1982 by Stern Electronics, and was a shoot-'em-up set inside a booby-trapped South American temple, think Donkey Kong meets Pac-Man, but with more spiders and whips. At its peak, over 65 cabinets were in circulation. Lost Tomb did something no game had ever done before. When you died, it played an in-game advertisement offering 25 whips for 1 credit, 25 whips for 25 cents. It was arguably the first true microtransaction, and surprisingly, no one complained. I couldn't find a single article or review from the era criticizing the mechanic, or even predicting what it might lead to. To be fair, it was 1983 and I couldn't find many articles from the era, period. But the few articles I did find had quite the opposite impression of the game. They found its mechanics unique, and even praised it for the 25 whips for 25 cents. A 1983 issue of Video Games magazine even praised Lost Tomb as the best Raiders-inspired game so far, clearly referring to 1981's Raiders of the Lost Ark, starring Harrison Ford. And as we know, that was one of only 3 Indiana Jones movies ever released. So what gives? Why did players in 1982 accept something that would later ignite endless debates in gaming? It wasn't like it was the normal. Other arcade games weren't doing it. But I would think perhaps it's like the frog in boiling water. Players didn't revolt over the whips, it was just a few coins. But like a frog in warming water, they didn't notice the heat changing, until they were knee-deep in loot boxes and battle passes. Or it could just be that Lost Tomb never quite got the mainstream following it needed to be a hit. So as gamers are wont to do, we forgot about it, and in the true spirit of its name, it was lost to time. For our next hop through time, we leap forward 8 short years, to 1990. The Cold War was ending, The Simpsons had just launched its first season, and Home Alone ruled the box office. MTV was still playing music, and everyone was quoting Wayne's World. Also, slap bracelets were banned in schools across the country. But even then, something strange was brewing in arcades. Double Dragon 3, The Rosetta Stone was a sequel to Techno Japan's beloved Double Dragon and Double Dragon 2, The Revenge. But it came with a twist. The third installment wasn't developed by Technos themselves. It was handed off to a different studio, East Technology. That change in hands resulted in a game that looked and played very different from its predecessors. But the real shock came when the game hit Western arcades. Double Dragon 3 featured what many consider to be the first in-game cash shop. Between levels, players could walk into a literal in-game shop and insert real quarters to buy new characters, power-ups, and weapons. 1 coin per item. And it wasn't just optional. The game was notoriously difficult, borderline unbeatable without using the shop. The backlash was strong enough that by the time the game launched in Japan, the item shop had been completely removed. Yet despite the controversy, and even after the developers rolled back the shop feature overseas, the game was still commercially successful and widely played, and even got a port to consoles later. Maybe players didn't yet realize the slippery slope they were standing on, or maybe the name Double Dragon still held enough weight to carry them through one more brawl. No matter the cost, Double Dragon 3 started the cogs turning in many a CEO's mind. For our third stop through time, we leap forward just 7 years to 1997. When Titanic made us question sea travel, Final Fantasy VII blew gamers' minds, and the internet was still slowly dialing its way into homes across the world. We're looking at Achaea, Dreams of Divine Lands, which was a MUD, or multi-user dungeon, a kind of early predecessor to MMOs where hundreds of players explored the same persistent online world, although with one simple catch. They did it all through text. Yep, you heard that right. MUDs were fully text-based online RPGs, where you fought monsters, dueled other players, explored vast kingdoms, and did it all through the written word. The late 90s was a tough time for online games. Services like AOL had just shifted from by-the-hour pricing to flat monthly subscriptions. This cut off a major revenue stream for MUD operators, as detailed in an article by PC Gamers In. Achaea's founder Matt Mihaly had to figure out how to keep the lights on, and fast. His solution was revolutionary. Instead of charging by the minute or requiring a subscription, he would sell virtual currency. Didn't have enough gold? Pay a few bucks. Later, the system evolved to include purchasable items, character lessons, and powerful gear called artifacts. Some artifacts cost over $700, and fully maxing your character skills could run you around $500. One player reportedly spent over $20,000 in total. Achaea became a kind of experimental lab for monetization. Mihaly even introduced a mentor system where mentors earned a cut of their mentees' purchases. A tactic some later criticized as multi-level marketing scheme, or to put it more bluntly, a pyramid scheme. Achaea has now faded into obscurity, and few even know its name, except its staunchest followers. But its effect on the games industry will forever live in gamers' wallets, and in many a YouTube video cursing its existence. And Achaea marked another success, another proof that microtransactions could be a successful form of monetization for video games. For our next stop on this saddest of timelines, we move forward to April of 2003. And we're going to sit here for a while because this story unfolds over several years. On April 29th, 2003, MapleStory launched in South Korea. It was a free-to-play side-scrolling MMO with an anime aesthetic that helped it stand out immediately. By July of 2005, it had gone global and would eventually grow to have over 95 million players worldwide. Just 3 short months later in October, the cash shop arrived. At first, players didn't mind. Every item in the shop was decorative. Outfits, pets, hairstyles. You couldn't buy power. You couldn't gain an edge. So the thinking was, what's the harm? But of course, we have hindsight, and we know better now. The shop didn't stay cosmetic. Over time, it expanded to include stat boost, XP multipliers, and eventually the ability to sell premium currency for in-game gold. What started as flair turned into fuel. Real-world money became power. MapleStory wasn't like traditional MMOs. It wasn't about quest lines or epic narratives. It was about the community, players building friendships, memories, rivalries. At its peak, it rived the player culture of WoW or Final Fantasy XIV. And its true power relied on having players. But today, it's a shadow of that former glory. The game now averages fewer than 10,000 concurrent players, and that number is steadily declining. Some say the audience simply aged out. Others blame the cash shop. But I'll let you come to your own conclusions about why MapleStory failed. And with that, we continue down our timeline of terror, taking a short hop forward to 2006, a day that will forever live in infamy. April 3rd, 2006, and the spark of a debate that's still burning nearly 2 decades later. The Elder Scrolls V Oblivion was a massive success. And seeking to capitalize on that momentum, Todd Howard, video game's very own Immortal, introduced the world to horse armor. Sold for 200 Microsoft points, or roughly $2.50. The armor was purely cosmetic. But this was groundbreaking. It marked the first real time a full-price single-player game introduced microtransactions. To their credit, gamers were not happy. According to Screen Rant, the price was ridiculed almost instantly. Forums lit up with complaints that $2.50 was far too much for a purely decorative add-on. Think about that the next time you're tempted to drop $100 on a Valorant skin bundle, or a premium Overwatch pack. Yet despite all the backlash, it sold. Millions of copies, in fact. And Bethesda noticed. The floodgates opened. More cosmetic DLC, player housing, spells, and more trickled in over time. Many critics and gaming historians point to this moment as the true spark, the shift that encouraged other publishers to embrace microtransactions and DLC models in their many modern forms. So what gives? Why did it work here, when the community was so vocal? Well, as the saying goes, it sold like hotcakes. And as Abraham Lincoln once said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And as this shiny new armor flew off the digital shelves, the gaming community divided between criticism and consumption inadvertently paved the road for everything that followed. For the next event on our timeline, we have to jump forward to October of 2008, a time when Iron Man launched the MCU, Grand Theft Auto 4 redefined open worlds, and the iPhone 3G was putting the internet in everyone's pocket. The gaming world was shifting, and with it came a new way to play, and a new way to pay. Now, I've never been much of a sports game guy myself, but there's a huge faction of the gaming world that's been enthralled with them since John Madden Football hit in 1988, or FIFA International Soccer in 1993. So it's only fitting that our next major event is 2008, when FIFA 09 released, and with it, the very first FIFA Ultimate Team. What started as a small paid DLC would grow into EA's biggest cash cow, eventually making up over 30% of the company's annual revenue. For those unfamiliar, Ultimate Team lets players unlock or purchase card packs containing randomized player cards. You'd build your dream team by luck or by credit card. By FIFA 11, it was fully integrated, and by FIFA 12, it had over 6.7 million players and was ranking in $1.6 billion annually. Around this time, the term microtransaction became part of the gaming lexicon, and soon after, pay-to-win surfaced as a way to describe the predatory direction the industry was taking. In fact, by 2020, FIFA Ultimate Team faced a lawsuit in France questioning whether those loot boxes qualified as gambling. So at this point in the timeline, the story is looking bleak. Every time gamers rose up to protest, it didn't seem to matter. And we're just getting started. For our next stop, we're not visiting a specific game, but a seismic shift in how games made money. In 2009, Apple, arguably the king of over-monetization, introduced in-app purchases, or IAPs, to the App Store, and Google quickly followed. What began as a seemingly innocent feature, buying an extra level or some bonus content, quickly morphed into something far bigger. Developers realized they could offer their games for free to play, then monetize everything else: art, time, gameplay, even basic progress. But no app embodied the new model quite like Candy Crush Saga. Released in 2012, Candy Crush became the poster child for the freemium era. It introduced mainstream audiences to timer walls, life limits, and pay-to-continue mechanics. A modern echo of arcade-style monetization. At its peak, Candy Crush players were spending a staggering $4.2 million a day, helping it surpass $1.5 billion in total revenue. But the real shift wasn't just the money, it was the audience. Candy Crush didn't target hardcore gamers. It appealed to the casual, often older demographic. Studies showed that 58% of its players were women, and nearly half were Gen X. It was colorful, easy to pick up, and extremely hard to put down. With over 255 million players at its height, Candy Crush proved that you didn't need a console or gaming experience to get hooked, and to spend. Its success opened the mobile floodgates. Developers worldwide raced to replicate its formula. Combined with the rise of gacha games like Puzzle and Dragons, Candy Crush helped transform mobile gaming into a multi-billion-dollar microtransaction engine. This wasn't just a trend, it was the new model, and it was here to stay. For our next stop on this harrowing timeline, we find ourselves in June of 2022. And the situation looks pretty grim. The world is still reeling from years of predatory microtransactions, loot boxes, and pay-to-win mechanics. Regulators are circling, gamers are jaded, and yet Blizzard, a name once held in high regard, has entered the mobile ring with one of the most controversial launches in modern gaming history. Let's take a look at Diablo Immortal. It promised to bring the dark dungeon-crawling glory of Diablo to mobile devices, with full multiplayer integration, new PvP modes, and an ambitious global rollout. The core gameplay loop was solid, the combat was fun, the nostalgia was real, but something wasn't right. From day one, players discovered that beneath the surface of Diablo Immortal was a labyrinth of monetization. It wasn't just cosmetics or time savers. This was pay to win, pure and simple. Diablo Immortal had a system of legendary crests, which were used to enter enhanced dungeons that dropped high-level gems. essential for maxing out characters. These crests would be earned slowly or bought in bulk with real money. The worst part, you couldn't even buy what you wanted directly. It was randomized, and the odds were super low. It didn't take long before Reddit exploded with posts estimating that fully upgrading a character could cost over $100,000. Community outrage was swift. The iOS version of the game dropped to a 0.6 user score on Metacritic, one of the lowest ever recorded. Predatory, manipulative, a disgrace to the franchise, these were just some of the milder reactions. Even PC Gamer called it a brutal backlash, and it wasn't just gamers who noticed. Belgium and the Netherlands outright banned the game from release in their countries due to their strict anti-gambling laws, citing loot box mechanics as a violation. This was no longer just a gamer revolt, it was now a legal one. Despite the backlash, Blizzard defended its design. The company claimed that most players weren't spending money at all, and insisted that monetization only appears in the late game. But that didn't matter, the damage was done. Videos of whales, players who spend thousands of dollars, flooded YouTube. News outlets picked up the story, and Blizzard found itself facing a credibility crisis at a time when Diablo 4 was still on the horizon. Diablo Immortal didn't just frustrate players, it became a global symbol of everything wrong with mobile monetization. The backlash unfortunately didn't kill the game. It still made hundreds of millions of dollars. But it did sour the brand, and it tainted Blizzard's legacy. And it showed something important, that when players and journalists and even governments unite to call out egregious practices, it forces the industry to pause, even if just for a moment. The moment wasn't a clear victory, but it was a turning point. It was a warning shot. But yet the industry kept pushing. Microtransactions continue to spread into every corner of gaming, and it would be easy to stop here, to declare the war lost. But the truth is, gamers have been fighting back. For the final two entries on our list, I want to look at two times that gamers won. When we pushed back, when we voted with our wallets, and made the industry listen. We gotta go back to 2017. Things are looking grim. Microtransactions aren't just in mobile games anymore. They're in shooters, RPGs, sports games, and now, even a beloved franchise like Star Wars. Enter Star Wars Battlefront 2, a game that promised epic galactic warfare, but quickly became a real-life battleground over pay-to-win mechanics. What happened next would become one of the most infamous gamer uprisings in history. This is the moment players fought back, and for once the industry listened. EA was riding high. In October 2017, they released the Battlefront 2 beta. This time they seemed to be listening, adding a single-player campaign promising free story expansions and dropping the season pass. But how could they monetize all this free content? The answer? Loot boxes. And these weren't just cosmetic loot boxes, like Overwatch had normalized the year before. These came with a twist. EA introduced a system called Star Cards, randomly obtained upgrades that would grant stat boosts, new abilities, and combat advantages, and they were locked behind these loot boxes. It didn't take long for players to call it what it was, pay to win. As launch day approached, the backlash snowballed. EA community managers scrambled, and on Reddit, their attempt to defend the system earned them the most downvoted comment in Reddit history, over 675,000 downvotes. Major outlets like CNN and the Huffington Post ran with the story. The Belgian Gaming Commission opened an investigation into whether loot boxes constituted gambling, which would eventually lead into our already talked about Diablo Immortal story. On November 13th, the review embargo lifted, and critics were anything but kind. Just 4 days later, and 1 day before launch, EA made a stunning move. They pulled all microtransactions from the game. Gamers had won, maybe not the war, but at least this battle. Battlefront 2 had a rocky life after that, and it never quite regained its hype. Some say it might have fared better if it had launched on Steam, or if controversy hadn't poisoned the well. Still, the game has an active player base to this day, thanks to late-stage improvements and renewed interest on social media. So what's the lesson here? Maybe the lesson is when gamers unite and speak up, publishers have no choice but to listen. But the next story is about a single-player game that reached for the microtransaction crown and lost not just credibility, but a beloved mechanic, a studio, and nearly an entire franchise. We don't need to do any time traveling for this one, because this entry on our timeline released on October 10th, 2017. It's none other than Middle-earth's Shadow of War. To understand why the backlash to this monetization hit so hard, we first need to talk about what made this series special in the first place: the Nemesis system. First introduced in 2014's Shadow of Mordor, the Nemesis system was a game changer. It created a living, breathing hierarchy of enemy orcs who remembered you, evolved with you, and even held grudges. Kill one, another would rise in its place, sometimes swearing revenge. Lose to one, he'd climb the ranks, taunt you in your next encounter, and hunt you down later. These weren't just enemies, they were rivals, betrayers, sometimes even allies, because in Shadow of War, you could recruit them, building your own army with unique, generated personalities and traits. It was personal, it was dynamic, it was unlike anything else in AAA gaming. So when Shadow of War wrapped that beloved system into loot boxes, offering to sell you orc followers instead of letting the world generate them organically, players felt betrayed. And it wasn't just any studio. This wasn't EA, it wasn't Ubisoft, it wasn't Activision Blizzard. This was Monolith, a studio we trusted. But Monolith was owned by Warner Brothers, and WB was anything but trustworthy. This is the company that patented the Nemesis system so no one else could replicate it. The same company that's turned the Arkham series devs into live service devs. They would go on to release one of the biggest live service flops in history, and eventually, WB would shut down Monolith entirely. But I digress. Gamers were furious. Pay-to-win microtransactions in a single-player game were unheard of. The backlash hit hard. Games Radar even warned that the system could serve as an entry point to gambling addiction. And under the weight of all that fury, WB caved. In April 2018, just 6 months after launch, they removed all microtransactions from the game. Gamers had won again. But did WB learn anything? Of course not, and the damage was already done to Monolith. Just this year, they laid off hundreds and shuttered entire studios, including shuttering Monolith. Victims of their own greedy push into live service failures and microtransaction bloat, WB destroyed studios. So that was 10 moments, seemingly innocuous on their own, but together they reshaped the entire gaming industry. So is there any hope for the future of gaming? Or is the medium we love destined to become just another cash cow, feeding CEOs while art and creativity are left behind? And whose fault is it? Some blame Todd Howard. Others point fingers at Double Dragon, MMOs, or mobile games. But I humbly believe none of them are fully to blame. As author Peter Drucker once said, "It is the customer who determines what a business is, what it produces, and whether it will prosper." The uncomfortable truth is, it's our fault. Bethesda admitted that the horse armor was a test, and if we hadn't bought it, maybe they never would have sold us anything else. Achaea's founder Matt Mahaley was experimenting just to keep the lights on. And every time we buy a deluxe edition, drop $5 on a skin, pre-order, or skip for extra lives on mobile, we reinforce that this is okay. We vote with our wallets every day, and the industry listens. It's positive reinforcement at its worst. I wish we could go back to a time when games were simpler, when creativity was king, but we cannot. All we can do is move forward, and as the teens from Lemonade Mouth taught us, we've got to make our voices heard. If you stuck with me through this journey, thank you, and I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know what event I missed. I try to reply to every single comment if I can. Or tell me what gaming story you think deserves its own deep dive. I'm the Chief Peasant, signing off.